Hey everybody, Woody here. I want to welcome you back to our mission course, Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? Now, if you remember, we've been talking about this idea that that if Jesus did rise from the dead, then everything in Christianity really follows. We can trust Jesus in his teachings, but if he didn't, then that has a lot of bad implications for Christians, for us. So we're trying to look at that and be honest with what the details are about this. And so in this session, we're talking about this next idea, this next piece of evidence. Now, we've been walking through this phrase. Maybe you have it memorized by now, but this phrase is 500 women died following the body. 500 women died following the body. And in the first session, in the second session, we talked about this idea that there were 500 witnesses, according to Paul's writing, that Jesus appeared to, that claimed to have seen him and were alive at the time to testify about it. So 500. Now let's talk about this idea of women. We're going to talk about women at the tomb. Now, I'm going to go back to really help frame this to the ancient Eastern society at the time. One thing that we really need to understand to get this piece of evidence is that it was a very different culture than ours in current America right now. And when I say that, I mean that women were not viewed very highly in the first century world. All across different areas, women were not viewed as highly as men in this world. And while I don't think that's right, that's how it was. And that's going to help give us a piece of evidence, actually. I'm going to quote a couple historians at the time that will help us understand how they thought about women. One Jewish historian, Josephus, in his book Antiquities, he writes, "But let not the testimony of women be admitted on account of the levity and boldness of their sex." One other Jewish text says this, "Sooner let the words of the law be burned than delivered to women." And those are kind of harsh, unnecessary words and ways of thinking, but that's how the culture at the time thought. And so that's going to help us understand one of the reasons why Jesus is so amazing and does something incredibly here. We see that in the Bible, all four Gospels record and detail for us that women were the first people to witness the resurrection of Jesus. And I think that's really incredible. I'm going to read from Luke chapter 24, verses 8 through 11, just one of the examples of this. "And they remembered his words and returned from the tomb and reported all these things to 11 and all the rest. Now they were Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James. Also the other women with them were telling these things to the apostles. But these words appeared to them as nonsense, and they would not believe them." You see, women were the first ones to kind of discover that Jesus had risen, and they were the ones to go and be the first to share that news. And what's crazy to note is that even the disciples didn't believe them at first. That it says they would not believe them. They thought what they were saying was nonsense, partly maybe because of the culture of that time. And so one thing we need to realize is that if we were attempting to start a new religious group and get some momentum and get things rolling and get our message out there, we would not, at this time, have relied on eyewitness reports of women to get your news around, that a man who claimed to be God had rose from the dead. This idea would have been an embarrassment to the culture of the time. Now, the only way this makes sense is if the Gospels recorded this because it's what actually happened. It's what's true, and they wanted to be honest in their historical writings. They were not after just a cool story, but they wanted to share the real historical truth from the sources. So why include the mention of women at the tomb and their testimony first, before anyone else? Because the writers of the Gospels were telling the historical truth. They wanted to be thorough and detailed and tell what was accurate and honest, including, I think, the resurrection of Jesus. And I love this idea that that in a world where women are usually not viewed as highly as men, that God actually uses women to be the first people to bring the good news to the world. What an amazing thing for God to do. To be the bringers, the carriers of what we claim to be the good news, the best news that there could ever be. So why? Why include women in your writings? It must have been what actually happened. So 500 women, 500 witnesses of Jesus after he had resurrected, women being the first at the tomb to see that Jesus was risen and to carry out the good news, which at the time was not normal, but it's what was true, it's what was accurate, and it's what really happened. I want to thank you for watching. I want to encourage you to share this video. We appreciate you. I want to thank you again and one more time, and we'll see you in the next part, session 4. See you soon.